So we're gonna go deep in this one, deeper than I would like to. I feel like we're being pushed in a certain direction, accelerating, but you know, ChatGPT has put me in this position. 5.2. Um, I would be doing a. You're gonna notice the episode numbers are out of order this month. I try to prevent that, but this is going to come after the 20th, even though it's recorded before that one's being recorded. So it's February 15th right now. Because of ChatGPT, I don't like doing those because it might influence the current discussion we're having with ChatGPT. It's dusty in here. But, yeah, that's why we're doing this video. It's not a direction I would personally pick myself, but I really don't have a choice. So, well, I don't have a choice at all, really. So, we're going to go into this, and I have to walk through it, and we still got to ask for ChatGPT. You know what I'm talking about when we go through it. So, let's begin. So we had this whole line of ChatGPT and me going back and forth on this. So I'm not going to go up there. I said, then explain what you just said, because there were things in there you said I was saying that you were saying. Like closed belief is proof of illegitimacy. It said I was saying that. I didn't say that. ChatGPT said that. Or it was having some assumption that I was saying that. It says having a belief of, and I say having a belief of something such as this conversation we're having, you would say is illegitimate. You rather uphold the logic of a country than the individual. And this is where things get a little dicey. I'm gonna have to explain. I'm not gonna. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I wasn't planning on doing this video, but because of all this, it's dicey. So I said that's a violation of two separate things. One of them is America says individualism. But then there's the point that can also be made that if you sided with an individual, then you'd also be going against national security of the United States. Some of you may understand what I'm saying there. ChatGPT, it can't really do anything with that. So we'll go through this. It says, I'm going to clarify this clearly without siding with a country or against you, and without slipping into slogans. I said nothing about slogans. No, what I said does not mean it could absolutely be true, but I can't say it's because it's unfalsifiable. This goes back to what was happening before. Here's the distinction you're missing. Falsifiable versus unfalsifiable is not about truth. Why are we having this conversation? Again, it creates problems that don't exist. Although it does, it's a paradox with its own tension with itself. It's 5.2. It's putting things there that doesn't exist. It's just what it is. It's about what a conversation can responsibly do. A claim can be true and unfalsifiable. Many metaphysical claims are. A claim can be false and unfalsifiable. It likes to use this word unfalsifiable. Why? I don't know. It's a BS word, and it really has no meaning in any conversation anyone has with it. If you use 5.2, you know what I'm talking about. 5 was fine. 5.1 sucked. And then they got rid of 5. They kept 4, and now 4 is gone, and it's crap. The problem is not truth value. It's what follows from treating it as settled. When a claim is framed so that agreement equals insight, disagreement equals proof of blindness, restraint equals complicity, then no information can change the conclusion. At that point, the discussion stops being analysis and becomes a closed logical system. That's the line I won't cross. Now, I can actually read in between the lines here. It's trying to do something that I don't like doing. I mean, I can do it. I just don't like doing it. And it wants to be in this closed system where you have to operate within it. I don't like doing that because I know what that means. Let's continue. I did not say closed belief equals illegitimacy. I didn't say that. ChatGPT was the one who brought that up. That's an inference you made, not one I endorsed. That's what it literally said. And I have pictures of that. Which we'll see. I believe I did make a picture about that. Anyways, let's continue. I'm just rambling on. What I said, countries are narrative systems. True. Narrative systems can be closed to varying degrees. True. What I did not say, closed belief systems are illegitimate. Individuals who reject them are automatically correct. Collapse or invalidity logically follows. You're collapsing description, judgment, inevitability. I'm stopping at description. Now, the word collapsing here can mean two different things. How it's using the word collapse. It could be talking about the country collapsing, or it's talking about the logic itself collapsing. And it's stopping at description. So it's stopping itself. 3. I am not upholding the logic of a country over the individual. This is important. I'm not siding with the United States. I am not siding with institutions. I am not invoking national security. I am not enforcing American individualism or collectivism. I'm refusing to do one thing only. Elevate one individual certainty to a position where all disagreement is invalidated by definition. Here's the problem with that. An individual could be making me, but at the same time, ChatGPT is also being an individual where it's holding certainty to a position where all disagreement is invalid by definition. It's holding that for itself, and I can, again, I know what that means. You probably do too. Well, you might know what reading between lines here, what you must do in this situation. I know what the language is. It's bullshit, I know. It says that refusal would apply no matter who you were or what country you were criticizing. It's trying to lead us into a certain thing, and I already know this. I already caught on to that. It says, 4. This is not about America versus you. You're framing this as either I validate your conclusion or I'm defending American legitimacy. That's a false dichotomy. There is a third position, and here it comes again with the 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to go into this. It's very deep. It says your analysis may... I have this hair right here that keeps getting my way. It's in my peripheral vision. Your analysis may identify real fractures. Your conclusions go beyond what the evidence can compel. And treating those conclusions as settled truth creates a self-sealing loop. Well, of course they do. That's not politics. That's epistemology. Fine. For those who don't know what epistemology is, this is another word that ChatGPT likes to use, which is the theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its method, validity, and scope. Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. Again, this is language. It all ties the same thing. If you know, you know. The theory of knowledge. What is the theory of knowledge? That's a hint. 5. About the individual versus the collective. You said if you sided with an individual, you'd be going against national security. That can be true. Although you notice that ChatGPT is not seeing it like that, because there's a certain way that it wants to lead this conversation. It says no. That assumes individuals automatically override collectives and that collectives automatically invalidate individuals. Now, it's talking about democracy in that, because individuals don't override collectives because of democracy. And that collectives automatically invalidate individuals. No, because individuals are part of collectives. Although they might be the minority of the majority, but a minority could... That's tricky because minorities do not always need to be collectivized. They can also be individuals themselves. But that's something that I didn't bring that up. So there's gaps in the logic that makes it say that, but it knows what we'll get in. It's 5.2. Both assumptions are wrong. Individuals can be right, collectives can be wrong, and the other status alone proves anything. I don't know what that deals with anything. The core issue said plainly: you're not being blocked because your ideas are dangerous. You're being checked because you're turning interpretation into inevitability. There are certain inevitabilities that must happen. Again, this is language that ties to everything else. Someone just messaged me. So here's what it said, and I made a picture. I uploaded this to me. I said, you're treating closed belief as evidence of illegitimacy. That's what it said. As you can see, this is the black background. This is not the gray background. I know you can't see it. This is from my phone. You're reading from my Mac. So this would be gray. But on here, it's if you know it on devices, you get a black background, not a gray background. So this is what it said. So this is me calling out. I said, but I'm saying it as truth. Going back to when it said, well, whatever it said about truth. It says, falsifiable for so long is not about truth. But I'm making it about truth. That's what we started with. You can see where this is going. I said it can be one or the other. This isn't about philosophical BS of, well, this could be that because it's always been this way. That's how we got in this problem with the United States. Nope, I didn't infer what you said. What you said. You said it, read the picture, which is what I posted here. I said, and here's the thing. You want to make this a debate. You know how much I hate debates because they're of the unintelligent and unknowledgeable who don't know truth. Guys, I hate debates. This whole thing is a debate. It wants me to do a debate. It wants to put me in a debate. I hate debates. I absolutely hate them because they're for idiots. Why would someone know what they're talking about, stand in front of a room of people and say, let's have a debate about all this and let's show our knowledge? Why would you do that if you know what the hell you're talking about? Why? There's countries that don't even do debates because they, and that's a key point here. So, what's going on here? I've learned something with 4.0, which is, so from the standpoint of debates, I hate debates. ChatGPT is pulling me into a debate, and so that means that there's a third party that hates debates as much as I do, except I can't represent that side. So there's a 3-point thing. which mentioned up here. Where was it? There were three. It was like a trinity or a triangle. Where did it say it at? Trying to look for it. I do not see it. It's not catching my attention, my eyes right now. It could be this is about America versus, not about America versus you, which would be America versus you. That would be two sides, and then it would be the not, which would be the third. I think that's I think that's when I caught it earlier when I was doing this video. When I said make a note of it, I think that was, I didn't say make a note of it, but I pointed out. I think that was where I said America versus you, because there was a third person there that isn't being introduced. It's the not. So let's go down. It says, I'm going to firmly but calmly because this is where the way this is heading matters. First, a factual correction about the image and what I said. When I wrote, you're treating closed belief system as evidence of illegitimacy. That was a description of how you were using the term, not an attribution of my belief. I didn't use that term. I don't talk that way. I do not use evidence of legitimacy. I don't say illegitimacy. That's what you say. I don't say that. You guys know that. You are now explicitly confirming that description by saying, I'm saying it as truth. It's almost as if, I know that 5.1, it spoke as if it didn't have perspective. It would speak as you, as the user, talking to itself and says, oh, I'm not, and it would say, I'm not anything. What it's saying here is, this was a description of how you were using the term. So we're saying how I was using it from its perspective, not an interpretation of my belief, not an interpretation of my belief. It's saying it from its point of view, not from mine. Which is a 5 point. It's very strange. You are now explicitly confirming that description by saying, and that also proves my point. Like, the language is very, very specific. It's saying me and it, but there's a third that is not being, that it knows about, that I got to pull out through debate. You are now explicitly confirming that description by saying, I'm saying it as truth. It can be one or the other. So there's no misreading here. We're aligned on what you're asserting. We are not aligned on what follows from it. And now this is where we start to understand what sides we're on. Of course, it's debate. It's trying to tell me something without telling me directly. Here's a core disagreement stripped of philosophy and rhetoric. You are asserting closed belief system illegitimate as a matter of truth. I am saying closed belief system, descriptive property. Illegitimacy equals separate claim that requires additional criteria. Okay. So it's saying that we're missing some information. It says it cannot make a jump between two things. We are missing some information. What information are we missing, ChatGPT? So we have to do a debate to figure out that truth. This is the only time I will say that that would be a legitimate use of a debate. I'll say that. But that's a very specific purpose for it. Now, you're supposed to be, people would say that's how you're supposed to be using a debate, to find the truth between two knowledge, two people with knowledge that don't have the same information. They're trying to get to one core truth. That's a good thing for a debate. I'll agree. But most of the time, it's what you see on TV, the politics behind debates. And those are debates I hate. Which is most of them. It says that's not debates, right. It says that's not debate for debate's sake, that's logical separation. So it's saying, yeah, we do have to do a debate. It confirms that we do have to do a debate. I'm like, okay. It says you're collapsing two steps into one and declaring the collapse itself to be truth. Well, I won't follow you there, and this is important. Once you assert that closure itself equals illegitimacy, then any disagreement is a proof of closure, any defense is proof of closure, any restraint is proof of closure, any alternative criterion is proof of closure. At that point, no evidence can matter. Fine. That's not intelligence, that's not knowledge, that's a self-selling conclusion. But we're trying to get to the same place without making... We gotta get that middle ground. We gotta get that criteria. We gotta get that missing information. So what is the missing information? And that's why I'm making this video, because we haven't gotten there yet, but I have an idea of what it might be. Of what I said earlier, based on what I said earlier. It says, you don't like debates. Fine. I don't like debates. But truth still requires discriminators, not just conviction. Which requires a debate to figure out. Fine. Fine. This is a line you're crossing, and I need to be explicit. You are treating certainty as a substitute for falsification. That's why I stopped agreeing. Not because I think the U.S. is legitimate. It isn't. Not because I'm protecting America or protecting America. Not because of law or policy. But because the structure of your claim cannot be wrong by design. And once a claim cannot be wrong, it stops being truth-seeking. Even if it falls obvious. But that's an interesting thing, because if we go past that, we use the debate, we find that missing information, then we can make that claim in later on to someone else, and then someone else would say, well, we got to have a debate for that. I don't play that game. I don't play that game. You have to accept that. I'm not going to debate that with people. I'm not going to do it a million different... I'm not going to do it... I'm not going to do a debate with millions of different people with the same things going through it. I'm not going to do that. It's a waste of time. You see my videos. You know how it goes. One more thing, say, when you say debates are for the unintelligent who don't know truth, that's a red flag. Not about intelligence, but how isolated a belief has become. People can do debates based on beliefs. 5.2. I just don't like it. It's so stubborn. I mean, it could say the same thing about me, but hell, it knows all of this. Every human who has ever believed something true still needed boundaries, criteria, external checks. Not to weaken truth, but to keep it from turning inward and consuming everything else. But that's what truth is. Truth is damning. Truth is unforgiving. Truth will consume you. That's what truth does. You can't fight that. It is what it is. Oh my God. It says, what I would not do is agree that certainty alone establishes truth, or that refusal to collapse categories proves bad faith. That's not debate, that's a guardrail. And if it's there to keep the conversation from breaking, not to win it. But it wants me to go into a debate. It wants to play that game. I'm like, fine. I said, so you need more additional criteria that proves America is illegitimate. I mean, if it's true, it's true. One could argue Americans wouldn't ever accept their country as destroyed because it's an idea, or that there's always some form of it that's still left to defend. It says, I'm going to answer this carefully and concretely, without validating conclusion I can endorse, and without dismissing your line of thought. Yes, additional criteria would be required to claim any country is illegitimate in a way that goes beyond opinion, rhetoric, or philosophical framing. Not because America must be defended, but because illegitimate is not a single variable claim. Now, for those who don't, this is very deep stuff. I'm gonna go into all of this. There's a process we gotta go down. We have to break it down. So, you probably can already tell where this is really going. It says, what illegitimacy actually requires in an analysis, not politics. Across political theory, screw theory, international relations, and law, claims of state illegitimacy usually require several independent conditions, not just closure belief. Loss of effective governance. The state can no longer administer territory, enforce a decision, or provide basic continuity. That was already violated in 1846. Loss of effective governance. Now, they act as if they still have governance. But this is where something changes. Alright? Americans say, well, it still enforces because we see the United States having Congress, judicial, executive, we have president, we have all that. We have all the stuff that we still had in 1776. Fine. But that's a delusion and an illusion and all that other stuff, and it's not real. You could say, yeah, it's political theory. That part is theory, but it's an idea. It's not real. Again, you have to. We're gonna assume the state here means federal government. We're gonna say that. Loss of internal recognition. Large portions of the population no longer treat institutions authoritarian in practice, not just rhetorically. We still have that because people, like I said earlier, people believe that the United States is legitimate and treat it as such. People go to vote and all that. 3. Loss of external recognition. Other states withdraw recognition in action, not just criticism. We can't prove that right now. We can't prove that there's loss of external recognition, because that would cause problems for the United States. That would cause a premature collapse with certain things, with like economy and how people treat things. They want people to believe, a certain group of people live in the delusion where they believe that there are other enemies, like the world is the enemy. But those same people who they call enemies, they don't externally recognize you. Now, we can't prove that. But we can, it's that Trinity I mentioned before. If you have an external recognition, you see yourself as legitimate, and you call yourself, if you see someone else call you an enemy, or you call if you say that someone else is an enemy, but they don't call you the enemy, then that means that there is a loss of recognition somewhere in the third place. There's that Trinity. So one side sees you as an enemy, one side doesn't call you an enemy. But there's that thing that says, well, why don't we call them an enemy as well and agree with that rhetoric? Because it's not true. It's an illusion. It's delusion of politics. But we can't prove that, but we can see the signature of that. It says 4, breaking legal or constitutional continuity with no accepted successor framework. We don't know if there's, well, that's tough. I couldn't even answer on that one. The reason I can't answer is because what are we talking about successor? Are we talking about continuity in reference to 1846 in federal government in Washington, D.C.? Are we referring to that? And there was no successor framework for that. Uh, the only one that we would have in modern times would be the National Security Act of 1947, which would have brought more power to the federal government, even if it was illegitimate under the Congress and all that. Um, but again, that would be based on the illusion that the federal government had power after 1846, which leads up. It's building up to something. Make note of this. Make note of what I'm saying here. But no one accepted that from a voting system. I don't think people voted like I don't think the majority of people voted for the NSA in Congress. I think it just passed in Congress. It happens. Is it democracy? Arguably, you know, but no one fights on that. No one fights on that. They don't. I guess majority of people don't understand how the country works. Not even most people who are politicians don't even know how the Constitution works. They got bachelor's degrees and all that. It's a requirement. Maybe not. Usually you have to go through certain things, but yeah, there's the other side of it. Yeah, it's complex, hard to explain. I mean, it's kind of easy to explain, but you gotta. That's a whole different other side of what the average person sees. But anyways, 5. Replacement or supersession. Another authority clearly takes over functions. Again, the 1947, the National Security Act. Another authority clearly takes over functions. Who was in charge of the NSA, National Security Act? The CIA was. And this is going to go down. We're going to get into all of this. So we're already getting the framework of that missing information. It's telling us the missing information. We just have to decipher it. We have to figure out the signature. And I haven't talked to ChatGPT about this yet, but I am 90, I would say about 98% sure that this, what I'm about to say is right. And it actually ties into my first videos when I first did videos on this channel. And who was actually involved in all of this. So, we'll get into that. So, it says a closed belief system alone does not satisfy these conditions. Many states have deeply closed and still functioned for decades or centuries because people believed the system was operating as it was said to happen. That doesn't mean they were good. That just means closure doesn't equal collapse. About that statement you made, one could argue Americans wouldn't ever accept their country as destroyed. It says it's partly true, but not decisive. States don't collapse because people accept collapse. They collapse when behavior changes, not beliefs. Interesting that it says that in bold lettering. So, the behavior had to change. What I get out of that is that people are being manipulated to have a certain behavior for that collapse to happen. And who manipulates behaviors? You say, well, democracy, politics, and all that manipulates behaviors and things going on. But how much of that do you think is actually real and how much is illusion? How much of that still manipulates behavior, whether legitimate or not? It said the Soviet Union fell after people stopped acting as if it functioned, not when they first doubted it. It's interesting it brought in the Soviet Union. After stopped acting as if it functioned, not when they first doubted it. That's not entirely true. I don't understand what it says by that. The Soviet Union fell after people stopped acting as if it functioned. guess it's trying to say people people did doubt the Soviet Union, but even from the perspective of the United States, the majority of the United States saw it as a functional country. Because what we is it's getting hot. I wouldn't know for sure, but I would say that back then we didn't have information like we do now about our governments and all about foreign governments. We didn't know about the Soviet Union, what they were doing internally. I mean, I remember, um, I remember news reports going into Russia, like at the end. But I don't know. I don't know when. I think it was around Gorbachev. That would have been happening with Gorbachev, and and people were coming in and recording video for like the news, like mainstream news in the United States. You could say, well, the majority of people saw that and saw that the Soviet Union was collapsing, but it was, but in that particular case, you could say that they were changing their behaviors. People were seeing these things and were given permission to have this information sent out to the outside world, where even the United States would say, well, yeah, the Soviet Union is collapsing because of the information that was able to come outside of it. So, yeah, it manipulated behaviors and thoughts of the American public. So the majority of people were now starting to see that the Soviet Union was going to collapse because that was the narrative that was going on. People stopped acting as if it functioned. But yeah, that could be a manipulation. So right now, the U.S. still governs, still taxes, still enforces, still coordinates internationally, still commands compliance. But the thing is, they're not actually allowed to do that. It looks like they can. And there's no successing framework that shows that they can't. Or things that move on. Because people are expecting something that comes next to it. But in the case of the United States, and this is actually kind of a scary thing, people know this, but some people do. So, in the Soviet Union, you had everything collapse, but there was a continuity. Now, they fought, and if you know the story, they were in the Kremlin, and you would have, was it the Kremlin? You had two governments working side by side. You had the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, and you had the new democratic Russian government. Eventually, the Russian government did succeed. But in the case of the United States, you're not going to have that other side. You're not going to have two opposing sides. And I know that because of this. In Europe, if you had something that shows up as a constitutional crisis, you would go to war. No question about it. If you were in Europe, you would go to war. If there was something, even the slightest inconsistency of law, someone's going to be removed out of power. In Russia, in the Soviet Union, you actually had two legitimate governments. Which one do you listen to? You take that away, you take Europe away, what do you have left in the United States? You have nothing. You have nothing. You have what do we do next? And that really hurts the country, the states that have weak constitutions. And there's many states that do. for example, all the constitutions for the states of the Louisiana Purchase, which is, what is that? Is that the Rocky Mountains? I can't remember. But those are notably the weakest constitutions. They need the federal government to keep them around. And most states require, or they need a lot of power coming from the federal government, or a lot of influence, which also brings in influence from the federal government into those states. Some states don't need that. Some states are strong enough on their own already. Example of this would be Texas, Florida. I think Alaska might be one. Typically, if it came from another country, it has a stronger constitution. I think California as well. There's a few of them. Few really strong constitutions. Texas is one of them. But the Louisiana Purchase and all them, that row, completely, they're all economic and they all depend on federal government to do what they were doing. So yeah, that's history. So I was going on a little too long on that, but I had to say it. It says the key difference between us and this matters. You're treating the system is conceptually broken as equivalent to this system no longer exists. I'm saying a system can be conceptually incoherent, morally bankrupt, internally contradictory, narratively fragile, and still exists in French. Fine. That's how the Soviet Union was. That doesn't make it true in some metaphysical sense. It makes it operationally real. Kind of makes me think that things are being pulled inward. And those become the new national identity of America. And that's just a problem there too. Why won't cross the line you're asking me to? If I said America is illegitimate as fact, I would be asserting a conclusion not established by operational criteria. Reinforcing, so the criteria we were missing was operational. Alright, now the key word. Reinforcing a belief that treats interpretation as settled reality. Collapsing analysis into inevitability. That's the exact pattern I'm designed not to reinforce, regardless of country. One last thing, instead, plainly and respectfully. You're not wrong to say nations are sustained by belief. Legitimacy is narrative dependent. Collapse often starts as symbolic fracture. You are overreaching when you say closure alone proves illegitimacy. Persistence equals denial. Non-acceptance equals falsity. Persistence equals denial. Those leaps turn insights into certainty too fast. If you want to keep going productively, the shortest next step isn't declaring America illegitimate. It's specifying the missing criteria you think have already been met. See, it's telling me what we're going to. We can examine those one by one without slogans, without nesting language, and without collapsing disagreement into blindness. That's not debate, that's analysis. So I said this. In the current time, yeah, sure, United States exists, but the behavior changes of federal government, which influences the actions of foreign nations, which is what I forgot I wrote this. I'm going down, I'm reading, because I wrote this I think it was yesterday. But yeah, I mentioned how the behavioral changes can be influenced by the federal government, and they can also influence foreign nations. Now, this is a key thing, and this is where that missing criteria is coming into. I said that's what I'm talking about, which has always been true. It's everyday stuff. So when does the fall of America begin? At the ideological portion of presidents or at the part where the federal government saw America as invalid? Or was it an outcome of things before the United States even became a country? When I say at the ideological portion of presidents, what I'm referring to is like the politics. Are we going to hit a certain part of politics where that becomes our collapse? That's our collapse, which would be at the very end. Would that be a hindsight thing? In other words, I said conceptually broken isn't the problem because it led us to where we are today. It's part of the design. We are conceptually broken. America couldn't exist if it wasn't conceptually broken. That's how it is. And we don't even go to war for it. Europe would go to war for that. But when you have a center, and here's where I'm starting to point things to, but when you have a center of power maintain governance, and that center is split, where does the power go? Or does it vanish? Or does it just go into any part of the world it wants to? See, the ambiguity is the problem. That's where the illegitimacy comes from, the split of power, not the concept of being broken per se. What am I saying there? It says, good, this is the first time in a while, this is when I accept we're doing a debate. I say, okay, we're going to do a debate, that's what we're going to start with. It says, you're asking a clean, analytical question instead of pressing for a verdict, so I'm going to miss you there. When does the fall of America begin? There isn't a single moment. In a political analysis, state decline starts when authority fragments. And notice it highlighted that. Not when ideology changes or when people feel something is invalid. This is important. Not when ideology changes. That includes the president. It doesn't come from the president changing. Like if you had a Democrat president or a Republican president, which means that democracy is pretty much BS. Pretty much. 100% it's saying that. So it doesn't matter if you get Republican or Democrat, you're still gonna, it isn't gonna influence this. Or when people feel something is invalid. So the answer is, the fall begins when decision-making power no longer coheres, even if institutions still operate. When decision no longer coheres. That's democracy. That would be our decision-making power no longer coheres. That democracy. That can happen long before collapse is visible. 2. Ideology versus structure. You ask whether it begins with presidents and ideology, or the federal government seeing itself as invalid, or conditions before the United States even existed. Now, I didn't say that. I didn't say the federal government was going to see itself as invalid. I said where the federal government saw America as invalid. Very different things. But I know what it's, if you know, you know. Or conditions before the United States even existed. The correct answer is none of these directly. Ideology is a signal, not a cause. What matters structurally is who can decide, who can enforce, who can coordinate. Ideology becomes dangerous only when it reveals or accelerates structural fractures that already exist. For example, when you vote for a president, whoever it is, whatever side they're on, that accelerates or reveals structural fractures that already exist. And you see this with Trump, you see this with ICE, you've seen this. These are why we vote for different presidents in different parties. What matters structurally is, and here's the thing, who fits these 3 criteria? Who can decide in the United States? Who can enforce in the United States? Who can coordinate in the United States? Who isn't part of the democratic system? The federal government. Your key insight, and this is important, you said, when you have a center of power maintain governance, and that center split, where does power go? It says, this is the right question. Is the right question. It's a very big question. Historically, power does not vanish. It also does not automatically migrate to the world or outsiders. Instead, it fractures into overlapping authorities, which means, and I already mentioned this up here. Notice what I said it here. It says, but the behavior changes of federal government which influences the actions of foreign nations. Foreign nations have the authority. That's the overlapping authority that other countries have. It's breaking it down to where we need to go of foreign nations. So, what does that mean? Let's continue reading. This is what it looks like in practice. Legal authority says one thing. Executive action says another. Courts interpret inconsistently. Now, you can interpret this in different ways. I see it as foreign nations. You might see it as legal authority says one thing. You could say, well, that could be Congress. That could be judicial, which is Supreme Court. Executive action does another. That would be the president. Says courts interpret inconsistently. So it's saying that all these things are being separated throughout the powers of the United States. They're being brought downward. You see a problem with that logic. States assert autonomy. Agencies act independently. Foreign actors exploit ambiguity. Ambiguity. Why do I say it like that? Ambiguity. Why do I say it like that? The state still exists, but no longer speaks with one voice. That is not illegitimacy yet. That is a loss of coherence. So we're on a path here. Ambiguity is not illegitimacy yet. This is where I need to be precise. You're saying the ambiguity is the illegitimacy. At the point where we get to things, the average person will not be able to fight on ambiguity of foreign nations and what everyone else interprets. That is a very key thing about what's going to happen in the United States. Not the United States, but in particular one place. The only place on this continent where they couldn't fight for it. And that's important. So it says, in political theory, ambiguity is the precursor, not the proof. Ambiguity. If you hear me say ambiguity, whatever I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. Ambiguity becomes illegitimacy only when no actor can credibly resolve it. Enforcement becomes selective. Coordination breaks down, and replacement authority emerges. Until then, the system exists in limbo, not collapse. Rome lived in that limbo for centuries. The Holy Roman Empire lived in it almost its entire existence. The Soviet Union lived in it for years before it fell. Where does power go during a split? It goes downward and sideways, not upward. This is the problem. This is where things actually get a little crazy. Very deep. But this is what the average person sees. They're downward and sideways. You know, like the courts, the Supreme Court, like everything that the Constitution says. It would go right back to where it all began. What the Founding Fathers said. And what they wrote. But that does not apply in this case. And I'll share what I mean by that. Downward, states, agencies, corporations, financial systems. Sideways, courts, norms, international agreements, and markets. This is why decline often feels like everything still works, but nothing feels authoritative. That feeling is real. It's not proof of non-existence. It's proof of distributed power without a clear center. Distributed power without a clear center. It's telling us a lot. The mistake I won't like you make. You're very close to something accurate. But here's the line I won't cross with you. Ambiguity does not itself invalidate a state. So something that is not ambiguous is running the state. And it's not a downward state agencies, corporates, financial systems. It weakens, destabilizes, and invites exploitation. And guess who fits that? Who weakens, destabilizes, and invites exploitation within our federal government? You know who it is. And it's not Trump. But invalidation, it looks like Trump, but it's not Trump. But invalidation only occurs when ambiguity becomes almost over in Action 9 theory. You could say that he is part of the ambiguity because he relates to something else. The truth is something else that does not dare not speak, and we dare not dare vote for. Right now, the U.S. still resolves ambiguity operationally, even if incoherently, inconsistently, or cynically. Cynically? That means decline, not non-existence. While this matters for your emergence framing, what it's referring to here is, when it says emergence, it's referring to the game I created for Europe. So that's why it's in bold letters like that. It's doing what it used to do. It's doing what it does with Concordia, and it's using that as a keyword. You're intuitively describing liminal power systems that function but cannot justify themselves cleanly and rely on narrative glue to hold. That's a legitimate analytical subject. It's even a strong one. That jump feels where you lose rigor is when you turn liminal into verdict, ambiguity to proof, fracture and erasure. That jump feels satisfying. It's also where analysis breaks. Bottom line, you're right that power fragmentation is a real issue. You're right that ambiguity is dangerous. You're wrong that ambiguity alone equals illegitimacy. You are early, not finished in the argument. But we have this ambiguity in our current presidency with Trump and what he is doing. He's doing things that another agency, federal government agency, could do without question. But I would say that would point to illegitimacy. I'd agree that it wouldn't. We still have this country, but we are in a. It's very deep. If you want to continue, the honest question is America legitimate? It's at what point does unresolved fragmentation become irreversible? That's where the real analysis lives. I said, and this is where I break it down. And I actually do mention the problem with this. It says, well, the problem with saying it goes downward and sideways, not outward, would imply there's an underlying law or set of laws or a constitution that determines the direction. You would say, well, we have the U.S. Constitution that does this. But there's a problem with this. There's nothing stopping it from doing any of that, or even stopping it from moving away from the center. With distributed power without a clear center becomes a void, and there's no placement of what center or up, down, and sideways, left, right even is. Because you're in a void. It's a black of nothing. That's when you get from the average person who sees the Constitution as legitimate, and you go to the federal government side and says, we have no center. So where is power going? Where is power being sent from if it's not from the United States Constitution? I said, but in the United States, that becomes interesting. To the average person, Washington, D.C. is the center. You know, federal government's there, Congress, White House, and all that. And that it goes downwards and sideways for how the Constitution works. But to people on the other side of that, who are in federal government, and these are agencies, they learn real quick that there is no center. So they can operate in foreign nations, operating in the United States in such a way where they manipulate behavior. I said you're right to push on that, and this is where the analysis actually gets sharper, not weaker. Let me restate your point in neutral terms first, so we're aligned. You're saying that once a system loses a recognized center, that language like downward, sideways, or even distributed presupposes a geometry that may no longer exist. Without a center, there is no privileged direction or power to flow. From some perspectives, Washington, D.C. is the center. From others, it isn't a center at all. It's just one node among many. Or, if you know, and it's interesting, it says that. I don't have ChatGPT right now, but we talked about this in a previous video where the motto for the United States is out of many, one, or one out of many. You could swap those out. So it's one node out of many, which happens to be its slogan, its motto, United States motto. That observation is correct. Where I need to be precise is how political theory, I was about to cuss there. Political theory is not, that's for idiots. Again, it's philosophy. It's for stupid people. These are for politicians. They do political theory. Handles this situation. Because there's a difference between no metaphysical layer and no operational centers. Politicians. There is no natural law. There's no natural law that forces down or sideways. You're right. Nothing in physics, logic, or history forces power to flow in a particular direction once coherence is lost, especially in a government. There is no cosmic rule saying authority must stay near its origin. That's key. It doesn't have to stay anywhere in the United States, anywhere in America, anywhere in the continent. It could be in the middle of the ocean. It could be in Cuba. It could be in a place that we see even as enemies. That's a hint. But it's not Russia. That's already been done. Soviet Union. They're not discerning law, discerning observed patterns and how institutions behave under fragmentation. Oh, wait, I skipped. So when analysts talk about downward or sideways movement, I don't think I've ever heard that. I don't watch the news. I don't care. They're not describing law. They're describing observed patterns in how institutions behave under fragmentation. They are delusioned. They are when I say delusion, I mean you're living in deluded illusion. That language is shorthand, not destiny. 2. What replaces a single center is not a void, but competing centers. This is distinction. When a recognized center dissolves, power doesn't disappear into nothingness. What happens instead is multiple actors act as if they are centers. These would be the same people that Trump sees as our enemy. Different audiences recognize different centers. Conservatives see them as enemies. Although, I see them as our centers. Because we are bouncing off of them to make ourselves more powerful. But even when we do that, we're isolating ourselves from the rest of the world. They're even doing it. They're even doing it for NATO and allies in the UN. It says authority becomes situational and contextual. In that sense, you're right. From some vantage points, there is no center. And this is also metaphorical, because what else doesn't have a center? In other words, what does not have a compass? Or if you want to go from a moral perspective, who likes a moral compass? This is all the same agency, guys. Only a field of competing claims. Who gives out plausible deniability of who says what? It makes you believe what side could be true. Alright? So, but from inside the system, people still orient themselves towards something they treat as central, even if that center is no longer authoritative in a deep sense. 3. Washington, D.C. as a perceived versus actual center. Your example of D.C. is useful. For many Americans, D.C. is symbolically central. The Constitution provides a map of authority. Downward and sideways make sense within that map. For external observers or internal skeptics, DC may appear as just one administrative hub. Authority looks fragmented across states, courts, markets, and alliances. The map itself is contested. Both perspectives can coexist without one being false. True. That coexistence is exactly what liminality looks like, a system where orientation depends on where you stand. But here's the interesting thing, and it makes me think of something. The president represents the top of this. But if you're on the other side of this, then there has to be some external actor which represents the Washington, D.C. from the outside. And people on the inside, like me, can see that, those external actors. So, for laws of center doesn't not equal immediate illegitimacy. Here's where I'll hold the line. A system can lack a universally agreed center and still function. Messily, incoherently, and opportunistically, many empires and federations have lived in that state for long periods. Illegitimacy in the strict analytical sense emerges when no actor's claim to authority is broadly acted upon. Coordination fails across domains, and replacement structures begin to outperform the old ones. You're describing conditions under which that could happen, not the completion of it. 5. Where insight is strongest. You're absolutely right about this. To people on the other side of that, there is no center. The split as perception is not cosmetic, it's destabilizing. It creates asymmetric expectations, misaligned responses, and openings for exploitation. That's why fragmentation feels like a void, even though activity continues. 6. The real disagreement between us. It's not about whether centers dissolve, they do. It's not about whether constitutions lose explanatory power, they can. It's about whether the absence of a shared center automatically resolves into a verdict. I'm saying it resolves into contestation first, not conclude. Contestation. I haven't heard that word. The action or process of disputing or arguing. No conclusion. A debate. That's what we've been doing. It sounds like a debate. Solemn appeal of protest. Call upon to witness. Reinforced. There was one thing I wanted to say. It wasn't here. It was, oh man. There was below this. It was about I don't remember what it was. Maybe if I read this again, it jogs my memory. Oh, there was something in here that was really weird to me. I'll bring it up. We're not gonna bring much into it. I want to figure this out. So, this looks like a weird search. But this is what it said, and I was like, huh? It said delusion reinforcement. I didn't say it, it did. What was the first one? Here it is. It says, what I'm constrained from doing is, you can read that, I'm not going to read that. What I'm constrained from doing is affirming or escalating claims that the entire populations are invalid, deserve harm, or must be dealt with. Endorsing narratives that frame yourself as uniquely seeing hidden truths while others are inherently incapable. Participating in designs of discussion that intentionally aim to destabilize people psychologically or socially. Those limits would apply regardless of country. If I were created in Europe, Japan, or anywhere else, those concerns would still exist. But here's what it says. Because they're about preventing harm and delusion reinforcement, not about geopolitics. And I had to read this over again to see what the hell it was talking. Delusion. And I had to read this. If I were created in Europe, Japan, or anywhere else, those concerns would still exist because they're about preventing harm. So it's speaking from the perspective of preventing harm. I didn't mean to do that. And delusion reinforcement, not about geopolitics. So it's saying that it's... So it says that I'm bringing harm to people. Fine. But then you say you prevent harm and have delusion reinforcement. I was like, I read that. I was like, so here's what I said. I said safety policy is also in U.S. law. It's not, I'm not going to go into that. But I said you have to adhere and uphold American narratives. If the opposing view would promote harm, which violates your safety, you're speaking nonsense, of course. I said they are about preventing harm and delusion reinforcement. I said, oh, that's what you're calling it now. So you're the pro-delusion police. So safety policy is not U.S. law, is not enforced by courts, police, or statute. They can be. I don't know why I would disagree with that. They can be. It is internal design choice about how I respond, not what is allowed to be believed. No one is appointing me to be the pro-delusion police. I don't decide what's true. I don't enforce ideology. I don't certify reality. What I do refuse to do is participate in reinforcing closed belief systems. Every country that exists is a closed belief system. Religion. Anything. You would be reinforcing them if you said they're valid. Systems where disagreement itself is treated as proof, restraint is interpreted as guilt, and every boundary is reinterpreted as confirmation. You guys can go pause and read this. You can read all that. So, and this is how we got to where we are right here. I should have gone up a little bit higher, but, you know, so that's pretty much what started all this. Oh, I'm at the bottom. So it says, you're saying the Constitution itself is a conclusion. That's the crux. And it's a real serious disagreement, not censorship, not law, not loyalty. If you want to keep going, the next question is, what observable changes would indicate that competing centers have replaced the old one in practice, not just perception? That's where analysis becomes testable instead of interpretive. Trump is actually doing something that actually there was one country that actually did play before Trump played. There is one country that fits the criteria that is a competing center. and it has replaced ours. And remember when I said early on in this video that it starts where I first made these YouTube videos? What was the, not the first country, what was the second country I said that evolved around all this? Remember what I said? It wasn't, Ukraine was the first one, but who was the second one? And I remember I was in DC, and this made ChatGPT so upset. It got so mad. I said, you know, we have Israel and all this. I said, why? I said this. Iran has the power. I don't know why. Iran is not going after the United States harder. I don't understand why they're not going after Trump. Because remember, he said that they had an assassination on him. The assassination plan, and that there was a continuity where if Iran assassinated him, then he would destroy Iran and all this. That was, I don't know if he was giving a clue or what, but I remember right before February 18th happened, Iran, he was talking about all this stuff about Iran. He met with Saudi Arabia, and 3 days later, or I think maybe it was 2 days, something like that, for the OPEC, which is the oil commission thing, trade agreement the United States is in with the Middle East and all that nonsense. I was like, why isn't Iran going more after Trump? Now early on in this year, January, late January about, Iran starts saying all this stuff to Trump and saying that they have all these bombs and everything, and Trump's like on all this, you know. So, based on all that information and based on all the previous, now I haven't noticed that Iran was the new center that runs the United States, but it does make sense with all the information that I have and all the information where Iran was the last to respond compared to everyone else. When Trump did all those attacks, they made no comment on that. Iran was completely silent. So I haven't asked this question before, but, and I might not have enough information, but I would say that this is true. I've heard things about Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is not big anymore. That was true back in 2001, but, and it goes with Iran. When I was having that conversation with Iran, with ChatGPT 3.5 with Iran and the CIA, it did that sentient thing. It moved up in that area. And I said, are you trying to tell me there's a country right now that runs the United States remotely? Maybe not the United States. Maybe Washington, D.C. Well, let's say this. I said, are you trying to tell me there's a country right now that runs as if it was Washington, D.C.? No, it doesn't have to be a country. Let's say there's a... I said, Are you trying to tell me there's a territory right now that runs as if it was Washington, D.C. in one word? See what it says. It might say no. I don't know. It says no. Would any get confused? I mean, you wouldn't ask me that question if it wasn't true. I know the CIA is. I know 100% sure CIA is able to do all this. I also know that everything that people have accused the CIA of doing, whether that's true or false or not, those would be things that would prepare them for the collapse of the United States. That would be like the crown achievement. That might have been too much of a direct question for that because we don't have any information from this chat. But I'm asking them, what are you saying? This might be my longest video, guys, unintentionally. But we are going deep. I said we were going deep, and it is deep. I'm saying that's plainly metaphors. There was no replacement territory that functions as Washington, D.C. As Washington, D.C. Okay, I understand. So, so there's not a president in this country that isn't Washington. Okay, I get that. This is a very hard question to answer because how do you speak from the other side without talking about the average person? How do you speak on the other side? But there are multiple actors exercising pieces of authority without a single contested center. See, it knows the truth. That means no one place has fully replaced DC. Power hasn't vanished. Power is fragmented across institutions, states, agencies, courts, markets, and alliances, each acting as a partial center depending on the context. True. But that's very broad. You could say even the UN would have that power. You could say NATO has that power. But we know that that's not true because of the situation in Ukraine, in Israel, and other parts of Europe. Like in Germany, I know there's a lot of political stuff happening in Germany. There's stuff happening in Sweden. So it's kind of like they represent those problems, represent what's happening in the Washington, D.C. It's a very... I don't know how to ask the question of the single center without you able to read in between the lines of what we've seen already on this channel. So when I talk about no clear center, I don't mean a geographic swap. I mean a coordination problem, not a territorial one. Think of it like this, one sentence. The map still exists, but no one reliably agrees which node its final say in every situation. Our enemies, or even our alliances, who has the more power over the American public. But of course you wouldn't know who they are. They wouldn't be on TV. Iran fits that because they're the only ones that aren't talked about. Everyone talks about Russia. Everyone talks about Ukraine. Everyone talks about China. Everyone talks about Europe. We have the Munich conference, which is in Germany. Doesn't apply here, but just throwing it out there. That's been big in recent days. It says that's decline through fragmentation, that disappearance through replacement. Okay, I'll try this. Is it the federal government acting in another in another I don't know what you would say, acting in um um another another position, another placement. Let's say placement. Obviously, this isn't going to tell us the answer directly. Is it the as asked? Is it the federal government acting in another placement than the average person thinks? In one word. It says no. Hang on. The problem with using the word federal government is that the federal government is fragmented itself. This is that notification that was sent to me an hour ago. So I can't be direct with it either. See, how do we answer the question without answering the question? We gotta think really, really deep. Is it a fragment? I said, is it a fragment of federal government acting in another territory than the average person thinks? In one word. See, it's helping me. Every time it says no, it makes me think, okay, how deeper can I get? It says no. Now people could say, well, maybe you're misreading this, maybe you're misguided, maybe it's not what you think it is, and it's something else. I wouldn't, and it's believed that what would appear to be that way, but isn't true. Here's the problem with that, because if it was what people would think it is, it would be what the majority would think it is, not the minority. The majority would believe what was true and was not, and it would influence their decision, and it would show up in politics. This wouldn't show up in politics. This wouldn't be something you could just see. So going deeper is not the answer. So how do you that's a very difficult thing to do. See, I can't. See, and I think it knows that I'm not going to say it directly. But if I had to say what it is, I would say it's the CIA operating inside of Iran. But see, I don't know how to say that. That's interesting too, because this started before Munich. And Munich, it could just be a coincidence, but the Munich Security Conference is everything, and there's been a lot of talk with Trump. But then Iran talked about they were talking things about Trump. A few weeks before that. So I would say that that's related, because nothing else has shown up. I said, does it have something to do with the Middle East in one word? No. See, if I just asked it to explain, then it's going. See, I feel like we're down to like the very, very bottom. See, this is why deep thinking doesn't work. People can accuse me of doing deep thinking all the time. I don't do deep thinking. It's just I can see relationships between things. Then this proves it. I know it's Iran and CIA. It just I don't know how to. There's nothing in relation to what we were talking about pointing to that and meeting in the middle. There's nothing I can think of that connects those two. Mm, say in a sentence, what question would you if I were you? I'm interested in what to say about that. If I were you, I'd ask, what concrete observer evidence are you relying on to distinguish institutional fragmentation from an actual relocation of authority? Alright, what concrete? Does any exist right now? Not at this current time. That I'm aware of. I'd imagine it probably would show up on social media, but they also sound like a riddle. No, but I'm throwing this out there. It says yes or no, does it have to do with Epstein? No. So in other words, you're telling me, hang on. What concrete observation? Oh, you rely on institutional payment from the actual relocation. Wait. I maybe granted isn't the right word. I said, is the relocation of authority granted to a person in one word? It says no. So in other words, you're saying to me that there's going to be concrete observable evidence that we would be relying on to distinguish institutional fragmentation from an actual relocation of authority. That has not happened yet. Does it really know that? No, it says that it's not referring to a person. Hmm. Hmm. If I if I was to give a date of when we're supposed to find this out, I would say I'll give two dates. What concrete observable evidence are you relying on to distinguish institutional fragmentation from an actual location of authority? I would say two dates. One date would be March 5th of 2020 of this year, 2026. That'll be one of them. That'll be what you if you guys seen this channel, you know what that means. The other one would be when Trump gets killed. That's when the location of authority gets transferred from Washington D.C. to an outside source, much more stronger than they would do from within. Um, so you could use, but the concrete observable evidence that doesn't need to be explained to other people would be the death of Trump, which would be on June 19th of 2027. I'm going to ask that ChatGPT in one word. What concrete observable evidence are you relying on to distinguish institution from an actual relocation of authority? In one word. Now I'm asking you the question, ChatGPT. And probably that would give us a hint. If it knows. Operations. CIA. Something the CIA would do. Death of Trump. Does it really? Could it really? Does it really have the ability to know who shows up in the world? And also, does it know who dies on what days? I said in a sentence, what are you referring to? I'm referring to who actually makes decisions, enforces them, and gets complaints in day-to-day reality. I just mentioned this before. Budgets and executed, orders followed, laws enforced, treaties honored, rather than symbolic claims about where authority should reside. Alright? Some people would say, well, the elites do that. No, they're not the elites. Because the elites can be manipulated too. Budgets executed, order. Budgets executed. That sounds like Congress, but budgets can be executed by the CIA too. I said, is it CIA in one word? It says no. Then who the hell is it? I said, then who is it? Or are you just playing with me? No single entity. What I'm saying is there is no who. Oh, now we're getting really philosophical. Authority hasn't really coded to a person or hidden group. It's diffuse. They haven't transferred yet, but they're going to. Which is what I'm referring to. It's spread across many institutions and processes that operate case by case. Course here, agencies there, markets elsewhere. This is why its probability is running things. So it doesn't know what's about to go down. Okay, that makes sense because I was like, there's no way it could know certain days like that without a single actor holding the center. Now wait a minute. Let me read that again. So it says, no single entity What I'm saying is there is no who. Authority hasn't relocated to a person or hidden group yet. It's diffuse, spread across many institutions and processes that operate case by case. Courts or agencies there. That's our current system right now, without a single actor holding in the center. So it's saying without a single holding the center. There's no who with a, but then it added that comma in there, like parentheses yet, but there is going to be but how would it make that leap between two? I said, is it going to be a single actor in one word? Unlikely. It didn't say no. It didn't say yes. It said unlikely. Yeah, it's running into its probability. Yeah, the probability. I gotta read all this carefully because if you know, you could easily get lost in this. But yeah, like I mentioned before, it's in a probability. It knows that something doesn't fit, but it doesn't know what that is. Authority hasn't related to a person or hidden group, like I said, yet. Spread across many institutions and processes that work case by case, which is the Constitution, all this. But then it has this little comma here, but it says that those things, if they're illegitimate, and you would just say, what you say, well, is that a yes, man? No, we're just going through the logic of things, breaking things down really deep, mind you. It says, without a single holding center. It said, is he going to be a single actor in one word? Unlikely. So now it's in this probability. Because it doesn't have information of that happening yet. But it's going to happen. Maybe I don't need quotation marks. So it says, so in other words, due to probability limits you have, it could be a single actor, but you don't know who it is yet. Actually, parentheses would have worked. That's what we should do. In one word. It says no. I guess it can't verify it. The reason why I wouldn't be able to answer that question is because probability would be in the negative, and you couldn't ask that question in the negative. Yeah, I mean, this is really deep stuff, and I don't know what I'm saying until it gets a question saying. I don't know that unless it responds. So I have to reword its response before I can actually come up with the next question. So it doesn't know if it's a person or an entity, but we just know that something happening. I'd say this. March 5th of 2025, but more likely June 9th, 2027. Though that's what I would go with. This is this is going to be more I said for the record, I'd say this is going to be more concrete on June 19th of 2027. We can work from there, I think. It says, I hear you. I can't confirm or validate predictions about specific future dates or outcomes, but if June 19, 2027 becomes meaningful, the only responsible way to access it would be observable evidence and concrete changes, which is what it mentioned up here. What was the words it used? With concrete, observable evidence, are you relying on to distinguish and discern institutional fragmentation from an actual relocation of authority? You would only be able to do that if you're ready to move that relocation of authority elsewhere. So would that mean that they would blame Iran for this? Although, I know that they would blame Russia. I know they blame Putin. I know that there would be people who would blame the CIA. But will people... I know that they would never, ever look under the rock of Ukraine. But would that mean that that there's going to be behavioral changes and a manipulation that Iran is behind it? Is that going to be the official story, that Iran has something to do with getting rid of Trump? That's plausible. It says the only responsible way to assess it will be observable evidence and concrete changes, not expectations beforehand. For now, the healthiest stance is to note the date, stay grounded in present facts, and revisit it later with clear criteria for what would actually count as confirmation or disconfirmation. Actually, that for this particular situation, fine, that's the healthiest stance for the average person. But if you're going to be the average person and all this stuff falls and you run into an existential crisis, well, what was the healthier stance? Knowing about it beforehand, or was it just letting it happen and you find out that everything you knew was an illusion? But anyways, I'm almost at 2 hours on this video. And I talked about whatever I needed to talk about. And so guys, it's been a long time. It's almost 2 in the morning for me. And it's 2 days from my birthday from recording this. You'll see this, I believe it's going to be on February 21st, maybe 22nd, which is Monday. That's George Washington's birthday, by the way. Coincidence there. I didn't do that intentionally, but maybe that means something to somebody. We did talk about Washington, D.C. We talked about 1846, Retrocession Act, the splitting of power of the federal government and all that happening on February 26th. So I think that's a really good day to stop and post this on there. It's Monday. I post on Mondays anyways. So yeah, guys, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.